first opened our doors.
Since 1926.
Since 1978.
For 60 years.
For 75 years.
For over 80 years.
In 90 years.
Over 100 years.
Nationwide has been on your side.
Restaurants have always been there for you.
Nissan has been with you through thick and thin.
We will do what we've always done.
Take care of people.
We're people.
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 People and family.
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 Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family.
Families are families.
Families.
Even now.
Especially now.
Especially now.
Right now.
Now more than ever.
More than ever.
Today, more than ever.
Today, more than ever.
In times like this.
At times like these.
During these difficult times.
In these troubled times.
Challenging times.
Trying times.
In these times of uncertainty.
During this time of great uncertainty.
During these uncertain times.
During these uncertain times.
In uncertain times.
In uncertain times.
Uncertain times.
Unprecedented times.
Unprecedented times.
Unprecedented times.
This unprecedented moment in our history.
This time of social distancing.
While things have slowed down.
As we turn more inside.
While the doors may be closed.
While the distance between us has gotten bigger.
The more we stay apart.
We still find ways to stay close. Even when we're apart.
Even if we can't stand closer than 6 feet.
We can all stay connected to work, school, and most importantly, to each other.
There's still ways to touch each other.
All without leaving the comfort and safety of your home.
Without leaving the safety of your home.
From home.
Home. Your home.
At home.
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 Home. Home. Home. Home.
Home. Home. That's the key.
Buick and GMC are here to help.
Con Edison is here to help.
Here to help.
Our teams are here.
We are here.
We're here.
We're here.
Here for you.
Here for you.
We're here for you.
We're here for you.
We are here for you.
We're here for you.
We are here for you.
We'll be here for you.
Runnings is here for you.
We're still here for you.
We're with you. We're part of your community.
So you can trust us.
You can count on us.
And we'll get through this. Together.
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 Together. Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
And together.
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 Josh told me he had that video and I hadn't seen it until now, and I laughed like 15 times during that video. It does suggest that there are, we're all in the same experience, that's for sure. It seems like every company is going through the exact same experience, both in its self-conception and its messaging to consumers, which is really more or less what we're here to talk about today. So my role is more or less to observe the questions and make sure you all get a chance to participate later. Josh is going to introduce the great panelists we have today, but I just want to, in introducing Josh, who is the CEO of Techonomy and thus even my boss at this point, Josh actually has an MBA in marketing, so he was definitely the guy to moderate this session. So Josh, take it away, and I look forward to how you think about that video, among other things.
Great, thanks, thanks, David, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks to the panelists. I was actually looking back, and funny enough, we hosted a session at our Half Moon Bay retreat in this past November called "Communicating in Crisis." So, we hosted this event in November of 2019. Andy, one of our panelists, actually facilitated a conversation with a former communication executive from WeWork. So at that point, WeWork was in crisis, and we said, "Oh, what a great idea to bring together a group to talk about crisis." Who would have known? Fast forward 4 months, what really crisis meant. Today, obviously, means something different. It's not just isolated to a company or an industry or a geography. It's touching all of us, both professionally, personally. So, I was happy today to bring together 3 communications executives really to talk about how they're supporting their organization. I won't say in these unprecedented times, because I guess that's now being way overused, as we saw in that video. But really, how they're helping their organizations navigate both internally and externally. So really excited. First we have Tara Carrero, who's the Chief Communication Officer at Nestle Waters North America. Tara's been in the role for about 4 years, and prior to that, she held senior communications roles at the WWE and Heineken. We have Andy Whitehouse, who's the founder and managing partner of consulting firm Copperfield. He's the former head of marketing and communications for Willis Towers Watson, a large global insurer, and also the former chief communications officer at both McKinsey and IBM. And finally, we have Martina Trucco, who's the head of corporate marketing and corporate communications at Micron Technologies. Prior to Micron, Martina spent most of her career at HP and then at HP Enterprise. And Martina was actually the one that pointed me towards that video when we were doing our prep call on Friday. So thank you, Martina, for that. So why don't we start with you? I mean, when you see something like that, that's so general, that so many brands sort of took on using similar language, similar imagery, how does that make you feel? And how are you thinking about at Micron doing it differently than what we just saw?
Thanks, Josh. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I think that video has been shared around, certainly within my team. We shared it out to our agency, even just to friends who are in the business to kind of laugh about it a little bit, because it makes you laugh, but then it also really does make you reflect on, to your point, what do you do differently if you don't want to get caught up in that, sort of too much cliche. And some of it is, you do have to use some of it because you have to acknowledge the fact that we are trying to communicate during, literally an unprecedented time, something that I don't think any of us in our careers as, communicators and marketers have ever seen before. But I think the thing that's most important for us has been to think about what are the things that we want to say that are credible for us as a company. And so for Micron, our role is we are one of the world's leading providers of memory and storage solutions. So that means we're one of the largest semiconductor manufacturers in the world. We have operations in 18 countries. We have 37,000 people. And the things that we make are really critical to actually keeping the world functioning right now. So the video conference that we're on, the work from home, more increase for cloud and streaming and, remote services, as well as, devices and staying connected for distance learning. All of those things are powered by Micron's memory and fast storage technology. So for us, it's been really important to make sure that we can still get our products out to the world. So how do we communicate about that has been the key thing for us to make it clear that, we're continuing to do our part, but we're doing it in a way that where we talk about the things that are really credible and not sort of talking about, more loosey-goosey things that feel like we're just filling the air with our messages. So it is a fine line to walk. And I think you're absolutely right that we need to make sure that we say things in a way that are not just credible, but also useful to our customers, to our partners. We have a very complex supply chain, and of course to our employees, which has been one of the most important groups that we've been talking to through this crisis.
Right, great. So yeah, I guess it's listening to the market, hearing what's going on in the real world, and the word I keep hearing come up with the phrase, and I never really heard it before, was this idea of being tone deaf. And Tara, it's something we talked about, making sure you understand what's happening in the world around you, that you're in some way reacting to it, but on the other hand, not wanting to sort of come across as taking advantage of the situation. So when you hear this word tone deaf, what does that mean to sort of how, you're thinking about your plans and your strategy, both balancing your core brand initiatives that you had before, as well as reacting to the current state of the world?
Right. Well, tone deaf's an outcome, right? So you have to start with how do you avoid it? Because by the time you get there, it's too late. So start by leading with action before you even think about communicating. And what guides our team are really three key things: purpose, awareness, and authenticity. So Nestle's global purpose is enhancing quality of life and contributing to a healthier future. So a good example that I can think of from our team is our San Pellegrino brand. It's our premium sparkling water. The brand was built over a period of time and became successful through the hospitality industry. And so when you think about purpose and you think about awareness and authenticity, well, what's going on right now in that industry? The people in that industry are hurting. So the people that helped build the brand are hurting. And so what Sam Pellegrino did is gave $1 million to the James Beard Foundation to help independent restaurateurs. So stayed true to purpose in a way that was authentic to the brand and being aware of the surroundings and how the people that helped build the brand were thinking and feeling in the moment.
Great. So I guess this, we've talked a lot, at Techonomy about the business roundtable and stakeholders over shareholders, and we'll get a little later to investor relations and how you think about your shareholders during these times. I guess thinking about all those various constituents and how you could support, those various stakeholders. So Andy, as someone who's sat, in roles similar to Martina's and Tara's, now sort of on the advisory side, working with companies, what are you seeing in the market? What are the brands? I mean, if you're willing to comment, what are the brands that are doing it right? What are the brands that really, have had some missteps and are trying to figure it out?
It's a great question, Josh, and thanks very much for having me. So I think I'd say a couple of things that sort of jump off what Martina and Tara were saying. The first one I think that is really important is this idea of authenticity. So brands need to be consistent with the way that they were behaving before, and I think people have, they are paying a lot of attention to what it is that companies are saying and doing, and anything that does not ring true to who they are as an organization right now, people are going to pick up on and respond to. So it's, this is not the time, it seems to me, to try to position yourself as something else. And why this matters is that we're in this sort of period of incredible focus on stakeholder capitalism, as you were just saying, Josh, that their expectations of companies, the way that their leadership behaves, the way that the company interacts with all of its different stakeholders, not just its customers and its employees, but its suppliers, with the wider community, is under incredible scrutiny. And to some degree, I think companies have welcomed that and have put a significant focus on it in the Business Roundtable communication and elsewhere. And my sense is that through the course of this crisis playing out, that stakeholders are going to be paying a lot of attention to whether companies deliver or do not deliver on the promises that they made last year and further back into the past. There'll be something of a reckoning for whether companies in this moment of crisis behave in a way that is consistent with who they are, their values, what they actually stand for and have claimed to stand for a long time, when they find themselves under pressure. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on, is the degree to which people are now actually living up to what it is they promised they would do.
So,
I'd love to build on that a little bit, if you don't mind, Josh, because I think it's such an interesting thing, because I almost feel like maintaining credibility is the table stakes thing that we have to do right now as brands, is sort of saying, do things that are authentic and credible, don't lose sight of who you are as a brand. But then I think the next step is that we really need to look at is, how do we then take that and use that as leadership right now? Because I'd like to think about the concept that we've been going through with our strategy as radical transparency, which has been something that has taken us even beyond what we typically would have said as a brand in any given situation, and realize that this is the opportunity for us to actually show up as an expert voice in the conversation. And that expert voice has been for our employees, it's also been for our customers and partners, and it's also largely in the rest of the ecosystem, as we've been called upon by the governments that we interact with to share best practices with other companies that are in the ecosystem, because we're really ahead of the game here. So I think it's also really interesting that the situation that we're in has created there's a lot of confusion in terms of who to trust. And I think brands have really had an opportunity to step in and be that expert voice and be seen as really credible, in not just in our own area, but actually in showing what the right thing is to do for all of our stakeholders. And that's really interesting, that I think that's an opportunity for us to go forward, back to what you were saying, Andy, about the way stakeholders really want their brands to show up. We've seen the benefit in terms of recruiting, where we've had so many of our recruits come to us and say, I'm interested in this position because I've seen the way Micron responded and I'm impressed. I want to be a part of that culture. And we've also seen it in terms of, really how we're asked to show up differently in the communities that we're a part of. So I think it's something that we need to think about, is going beyond those table stakes, and how do we have an explicit strategy, and how do we carry that forward, by the way, once we come out of this crisis, because there's a huge opportunity to come across as that trusted brand, because brands are more trusted. Brands that are trusted have a much higher kind of influence on buying decisions, employer decisions, all of those things as we go forward.
Right. So, and Tara, I think this touches on something we had talked about. I think I'd asked you about coming out of the crisis. Will brands be held accountable for programs they started during the crisis, and how will it be looked at? And I think you mentioned this idea of purpose, right? Purpose has always been a thread through the company and part of the core values. Certain programs may come and go, and different ones may shift during the certain crisis. But as long as you maintain, that idea of purpose. So do you still see that again, the programs may change, but purpose is still at the core?
Absolutely. And we see it happening now, and it's evolved from where we started 3 months ago to where we are today. Crisis planning is not a binder on a shelf. It's a muscle that you have to continuously exercise. And right now I feel a little bit like we're all building the plane while we fly it, but those that are going to do well are the people that have a solid blueprint and really great design skills. We've shifted everything from a corporate perspective, from a brand perspective, but we've been leaning in with existing partners and also working with some new ones. But that thread that runs through all of it is purpose. And the key has really been to listening to what the current needs are. Early on, our sister company, Nestle USA, who works with No Kid Hungry, gave substantial donations of food. When we started talking to them, they didn't need water. What they needed was a way to help 22 million families that have lost access to school lunches find meals. And so what we did, instead of giving water, which is kind of our DNA and our go-to, we gave them $1 million to build an online meal finding tool. And then we took our entire Nestle Pure Life ad budget for the year, multi-million-dollar ad budget, and we started running PSAs so people can be aware of the tools and the resources. And going back to the point I made on authenticity, we repurposed our partnership with WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, and we had one of their WWE superstars, Titus O'Neil, star in the PSA. Titus grew up in poverty. Titus was a kid that got free lunch. So this was really personal to him, but also incredibly authentic, but also, again, staying true to our purpose. And having partners during this time that are flexible and can work quickly to evolve has really been key for us. I mean, we repurposed an entire chunk of our WWE partnership in a matter of days. And so that flexibility and agility is really key.
Right. So it's funny, you mentioned crisis is not sort of a binder on the shelf. I think, Martina, we spoke about, your background as sort of an economist and as a strategy executive before kind of finding your way into marketing and communications. You use the words, the term, scenario planning. Right. So Absolutely. How a strategy or product, person would think that way. So talk a little about, how scenario planning, you had a plan, let's say January. I'm trying to think back the timeline because we worked together at CES. So that was January. We had a plan to work together in Barcelona Mobile World Congress, and that's where things started to change. How did you use scenario planning, or how did you think about the plan you went into the year with versus 6-8 weeks later, once we realized this was a global pandemic, and how to adapt your mix?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And Tara, I couldn't agree more with what you said, which is, you don't have a playbook just to have it sitting on the shelf. This thing has to absolutely be a living, breathing thing. But what's interesting is that, I did use those words because I do think scenario planning is at the heart of really good crisis communications and response, because you never really know exactly how things are going to play out. You can only be prepared for a couple different things, and then you adapt and respond as you see what some of those indicators are, and then you have to make a new plan, basically, or a new set of scenarios. And for us, you're right, Josh, the timeline for this has been really interesting because, well, it feels like forever, I think, for us, because we have we have operations in 18 countries, and so that means that we started back in January. We were already dealing with this because we have operations in China. And so we had a significant impact in terms of our team members in China not necessarily being able to get back to site after the Lunar New Year holidays. When those movement control orders were put into place, we had to mobilize really quickly to be able to support our team members, to communicate to them very quickly in the country, help them understand what was going on, that we were going to support them, that we were going to do everything that they needed. And some of that was even putting them up in hotels, giving them, emergency housing and emergency, response. And then also looking at what we needed to do for the community. And then it really kind of went on from there, where it started to hit some of the other countries in Asia, and we have operations in a number of those countries as well. We had then, moved our response into, again, talking about what did we need to talk to our supply chain partners, our customers, but always keeping our team members really at the center of this, because that's been one of the most important things for us, has really been to say, what do we need to do to keep our team members safe and to keep our broader kind of supply chain and our partners safe? And then what's the minimum baseline, and what we're going to go way above that. And I think that was one of the things that was really important to us in Micron, was to say we needed to do more. And Sanjay was really clear when he, our CEO, said to the entire organization, whatever we need to do, you need to be sure we're leading and not following, and always do more than what the minimum needs to be. And we did the same thing when it came to our communications, which was to say, where we might have typically just had a reactive statement, we said, as this thing continues to develop, we need to do more. So we need to be proactive. We need to reach out to our customers. We need to hold webinars with our suppliers or our distributors. And we need to really bring that level of radical transparency that I was talking about, to be sure that we're kind of keeping up and staying ahead of it. And for us, I think that's been really the drive. As we've sort of seen this thing ramp up, we've now realized, like, we've had to kind of evolve how we position things. And now the place that we're starting to see, where I think a lot of companies are, is as the threat level comes down, again, in some of those countries that started things, how do we then start to talk about what it means as we have more people returning to the site, as some of these conditions are loosening, and they're at different levels and different speeds. We need to make sure that we're responding in each of those scenarios. And again, that's where the scenario planning really comes back to it, which is to say, you basically just need to respond as you see the indicators changing and adapt your plans kind of on a daily basis.
Right. So Andy, how do you teach this, right? I mean, you teach at Columbia, right? You teach communications. All these things are great when they're thrown at you, but how do you prepare these, your students to really think about this?
Yeah, so Martina and Tara are absolutely right. The trick for crisis is being prepared, done the scenario planning, and being both ready to go and having really exercised the muscle. And it's very easy to say that in the middle of a crisis, that wouldn't it have been better if we were all ready for this? But the reality is, where my class on crisis communications, the main takeaway, if you like, is that if we spent 80% of our time on preparation and 20% of our time on dealing with the crisis, as opposed to the other way around, most organizations would be a lot better off. I think the reality is that that's not how most organizations operate, that a huge amount of crisis, both strategy and the messaging that companies are using to communicate with stakeholders, are being written in the moment. And it is incredibly difficult, I think, as an executive team, to both define what it is that you want to do and figure out how you're going to describe it for a diverse range of stakeholders in the moment. It just takes time, and as that time is elapsing, you're losing control of the story. I think one thing that I think is interesting in the current crisis, and I think we're seeing lots and lots of interesting examples of it, are a couple of things. One, that despite the fact that we all talk about it a lot, it is incredibly difficult to put yourself in the shoes of your stakeholders. And it's even more difficult to do it in the context of a crisis. I think the video is very illustrative of this, but there are lots of examples that we're seeing unfolding right now of organizations doing not a great job of putting themselves into the shoes of the audiences they're trying to inform and persuade and engage, and speaking to them in the terms they want to be spoken to. The other thing, which I think is also worth some investigation, is seeking to understand how the relationship between the CCO, the Chief Communications Officer, and some of the other members of the C-suite seem to be playing out. So for example, some of these companies that have been criticized for going for the government loans, I wonder whether the CFO and the Chief Communications Officer are really talking to each other and figuring out whether this is the right thing to do. Or those companies that seem to be making a mess of dealing with the very difficult task of changing the complexion of their workforce. Is the head of people or the head of HR talking to the CCO? Are they working sort of hand in glove in delivering these incredibly difficult messages to their teams and then explaining what they're doing to the wider world? Because if they're not, I think there's a really big missed opportunity there that would have been worth working on, practicing, rehearsing in the run up to any crisis. Obviously, this is an exceptional one, but I think it's something that's worth looking into.
Right. I think we may have we're going to try to go to questions throughout the next half hour or so. So if you have questions, text them in. I think, David, we have a question from...
Yeah, from Louise Harris, and it's very pertinent. Andy just set her up perfectly. So, Louise, you are now, I believe, able to talk.
Oh, thanks. I hope you can hear me.
Identify yourself, please.
This is Louise Harris from Orbis International. We're a global nonprofit, actually. And my question is mainly for Tara. You were talking about purpose and very commendable, your strategy for taking care of the community, especially the workers that have helped you build your brand. But my question is really, how do you balance the purpose and particularly things like donations and giving back to the community with the need to take care of your employees, and particularly if you have to face layoffs and furloughs at this time?
Great question, Louise. Thank you. So our business was declared an essential business. So actually our very first priority was how do we continue to operate with employee safety top of mind? And in this case, leading with action was really key. 2/3 of our business are frontline employees. So whether it's an employee in a factory, a sales rep out in the field, our drivers for our home and office delivery business that we call Ready Refresh, we did things like ensuring access to PPE, pay incentives, providing additional medical and mental health benefits and services, guaranteed pay if we closed a facility, free testing, changing the way we all went to work, right? We staggered shifts, virtual team briefings, increased sanitization methods, social distancing. In our factories, in our break and lunch rooms, we pulled all the tables apart and just had one table and one chair to create that social distancing. So paramount, was making sure that our employees felt safe and supported coming to work. With our home and office delivery business, our associates were empowered to make the call. If they didn't feel safe going into an account, they didn't have to service that account, and there were no repercussions. And we've since moved to touchless delivery. We've also empowered those associates. They're in the community every day. We have 3,000 drivers, and they're delivering to offices and they're delivering to homes. And so we've empowered them to give away 2 cases of water every day from our front line to somebody else's front line. And it's really created this amazing kind of uptick in morale and engagement. They're posting photos on our employee app like crazy. We've seen almost a 200% level of engagement. And so you're absolutely right. You've got to live that purpose, not only out in the community, but it's really got to start at home.
Thanks.
I just want to build on, Tara, what you said, because I think everything that you outlined is like the best practices playbook for the best possible response you can have, particularly in the situation. I think our businesses are very different, but similar in the sense that we have manufacturing. We have over 50% of our workforce, 50 to 60% worldwide, has been continuing to have to work on site, and in a very similar situation to what you're describing. We've had to do those same kinds of things to take every action necessary, all those things that you described. Similarly for us in terms of safety, physical distancing, protective equipment and things like that for employees, because it is also about helping them feel like they're staying safe, and we're taking good care of them in those conditions so that they can feel like they can be productive when they come on site and not have to worry about that. And I also really want to commend you guys for that notion of empowering the team members to be able to make a difference. And we've seen similar really amazing engagement on the Micron side as well, where we've had team members, we put together a community response and relief task force that has seen, hundreds of team members participating in, record time. And they've been 3D printing face masks. They've created solutions. They've co-created solutions to keep doctors and nurses safe at local hospitals. They've been doing all sorts of, virtual and local volunteering and things like that. They've been donating chemicals that we use in our production processes that actually can be used to help make hand sanitizer, partnering with local distilleries at our facility in Virginia. And the thing that's really interesting is that all of that has been partnered with our company's Micron Foundation, which is one of the best endowed foundations in our category. And they have really stepped up to say, we've committed $35 million globally to our response and relief efforts. We've done the same thing in terms of taking care of our employees with assistance payments, with a hardship fund, and really making sure that the communities that we're a part of get that kind of support, as well as increasing our matching for employee donations, which has always been a really big part of Micron's culture, but we have just blown through all of our metrics. We're on track to go almost, I think, 4 times what we would typically have in terms of our matching and employee donations in a given year. And it's pretty extraordinary to see the team members pulling together.
The innovation, the creativity that we've seen has been incredible. I mean, even just in our factory communities, each day our factories are ordering in lunch to help support local restaurants. And so in some cases, in our main factories, they've ordered more than 3,000 lunches over a period of time from local community members. And so empowering at the very local level is I think, critical.
Right. And it's interesting, it seems to be obviously a lot of talk, which is great, about ecosystem, partnerships, employees. You still do have, obviously the other side, the investors. And one of the things I think we talked about, Martina, was doing an earnings call during this time. And everything from logistically how you do it to, how you think about the message. How have you had to change your message to investors? I mean, obviously your products are needed, like we talked about, for everything from respirators to consumer goods that are being used like laptops. So maybe things are going well for Micron, but how has that message had to change for investors, and how has been doing things like earnings radically changed for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our Q2 quarterly earnings call was in the 3rd week of March. So you can imagine that as we were preparing for that session, it was right as when things were really escalating at a global level, and we've been watching them quite, closely, obviously, because of our global operations, but that's in those few weeks that were leading up to it, things were really ramping up. And there was a lot of uncertainty in the market about, companies retiring or modifying their guidance. So there was, that was one thing to really consider, really thinking about how much transparency we needed to provide versus how much we wanted to provide to our investors in terms of what we were seeing. And that was it. And even to your point, even how we prepared for the sessions, where we're used to being all together, in maybe one immersive video conference room in 2 different locations or 3 different locations, and all of a sudden we were dialing in remotely. We're used to doing the call from our office. And in the last week before, we realized we even had to change, because all of us had been actually sent to be working remotely because we were in administrative positions and we could. And so I think that was a real turning point for the strategy that we had at Micron to decide how much we were going to talk about. And what we really decided to do very early on when we were preparing was to really lean into it. We spent a significant amount of time in our prepared remarks for earnings going through every aspect of our response, going through everything that we were doing for our team members in terms of safety. We went through a detailed recap of what we were doing in terms of business continuity planning. We talked about the fact that we had not had any significant disruptions to our operations and our supply chain. And so we really walked through all the things we thought would be very important to our investor and our shareholder community. But we also went beyond it. And at the same time that we announced our earnings, we also announced all of the response and community relief efforts that we had been looking to unveil. And so that was something that we really felt was important to show that we were bringing the full strength of Micron's capabilities around the world to bear in this situation, which was at that time really rapidly escalating, and we knew that we needed to show up. And I have to tell you, the response that we got from analysts, from investors, from major institutional shareholder groups has been really incredible. And it was through personal notes, through emails, through phone calls with our CFO, with our investor relations team, directly to Sanjay and the leadership team, and has continued since then. They have really applauded us for the openness and the transparency. And again, I think it really shows you what the benefit is of having that leadership, both in terms of what you're doing first. It's really important to have the leadership in what you're doing, but then having the leadership to say, this is why this is important, and this is why the brand needs to show up this way.
Right, great. I think we're gonna go quickly to another question from the audience from Ellen White.
Yep. Yeah. There she is. You should be able to talk, Ellen.
We have Ellen there.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. Directed to any of you, but specifically to something that Andy said, I've also found that corporate business partners tend to spend 80, maybe sometimes 99% of their time doing the planning, and then they tend to deliver or dump their plans on the communications team to deliver messages, not within days, but often within an hour, depending on the audience. And corporate communications people, business aligned communications people are so frustrated with being at that part of the chain. And it hasn't worked well in the past, and it clearly doesn't work in a crisis. Have any of you found a way to shift an organization's mindset, even to a 50-50 balance, versus the way it seems to naturally occur?
Hi, Ellen. So what we've done, I think, is really position ourselves as business counselors, strategic business counselors, not just communicators. And this goes for 365 days of the year, not just during a crisis. Also sensitizing the organization to what potentially can have reputational risk as well as reward. So right now, it's the corporate affairs and communications team that's leading the company's cross-functional response. So we're in lockstep with supply chain, with the brand teams, with HR. We started 3 months ago with daily cross-functional calls, and now we're able to do it once a week, but it's not waiting until there's a crisis. It's really investing the time to position yourself and add value as a strategic business partner the whole year.
Right.
Yeah, I would just add the places where I've seen this be most effective are those where the chief communications officer, the people in those roles are sitting at the table alongside the business people, as you were saying, Tara, 66 days a year. That is just the normal way of operating, that the person responsible day to day for the reputation of the business, for thinking about how the business's actions impact its reputation, is part of every conversation about the business. If the kind of a dynamic, the one you described, Ellen, where sort of communications is the last in a sequence of actions, is too common. I think it only really gets fixed if the leadership team come to the view that says that we have to have communications at the top table.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, one of the things that we've found is really effective is that in my team, for our key business leaders, we have people from my organization who are embedded in that organization in terms of they will go to, the worldwide head of sales' staff meeting or the global head of operations staff meeting, be a really key member of that person's extended leadership team, because then they are able to understand the business, they're able to advise really strategically, and of course then that helps you be able to provide that level of counsel, or even just raise your hand when something's being discussed. And you can say, hold on a minute, have we really thought about this? Because these are the implications that it could have from a reputation or a brand perspective, and being able to get ahead of it is, but being at the table, of course, is critical. And sometimes that is one of the challenges that you see that I think Ellen was bringing up. And sometimes it can be an uphill battle in terms of really establishing that credibility of showing that it's really important. Andy, I don't know if there's any recommendations that you have for folks about how could someone actually kind of change that around in your experience that you've seen when they don't yet have the seat at the table.
So I was just thinking as you were speaking, Martin, I think you're absolutely right. So I'd go back to something I said at the start, which is that my sense is that lots of organizations are going to get judged based on how they perform in this crisis from a perspective, this notion of stakeholder capitalism that Josh introduced at the beginning. So companies have made big commitments. They have had their CEOs go out and set out the way that they're going to interact with a whole host of stakeholders, what they consider responsible behavior to look like. And the degree to which that agenda survives or thrives in the context of the current crisis, I think is going to determine how it is that people view those businesses. A part of that for me is about the CEO getting very used to being on the public stage, addressing public issues. And in listening to you talking about your earnings report, I think for lots of companies, that wasn't the norm necessarily, to be talking about broader public issues in the context of earnings. Maybe that will now become a norm, that actually companies will have to get used to having their CEO out in public talking about issues that stretch some way beyond the day-to-day of the business. One consequence of that, I think, is that you'll see more chief communications officers sitting on operating committees, because they're the people that the CEO is going to turn to say, how should I think about this set of public issues that our company has to address? How can I balance competing pressures, the fact that the world is complicated and difficult, and I need to be able to have something to say about these tricky issues that stretch far beyond the experience that I developed moving up through running parts of the business. So I think that one thing that could come out of this moment is an even greater realization that if companies are going to get judged by how they perform in the public debate, that they're going to be even more reliant on the CCO and their team to help the company navigate those issues.
Great, thanks everyone. I think we're gonna go next to Paul Stamoulis. Let me see, Paul, you're unmuted.
I am. Thanks for the discussion, Josh, and thank you all. It's been really helpful. One question I had is, you're both companies that are doing really wonderful work. You also have and are consumed, with customers that use your products, but may not have your brands in at the forefront of the company mindset. And so in a world where folks are thinking about how to move their messages forward, the question I ask you both would be, is now the time to kind of think about brand education and going to the next level of what you all are doing, or is now too opportunistic to be thinking that way? I'm just curious to see when would be the right time to make more people aware of all the good work that you're doing.
So I think from our perspective, you're absolutely right. The products that we make are essentially invisible to our customers because they are embedded in all of the electronics, in all of the devices, even more so if you think about them in the data center or in IoT or in automotive, and yet they are one of those critical things that's driving the functionality of those products forward. And so you're absolutely right that you do have to be careful at a time like this not to try to take advantage of it for brand building, because it can absolutely look very gratuitous. And so where we would traditionally take an approach to kind of a two-step approach to try to elevate the visibility of memory and storage into these kind of ubiquitous data conversations that we're seeing around us, and kind of these major drivers of AI and 5G and industrial IoT and VR and AR, where we would normally try to really drive from a corporate perspective in terms of making the role of memory and storage visible there. Now we're trying to shift to really make sure that we're not being tone deaf, going back to one of your earlier comments, Josh, and just focus on why our products are so critical to the situations going on right now, how those products contribute to kind of the global economy continuing to move forward during these times. And really we're waiting for sort of beyond that to go back to more traditional corporate level positioning, because that's the message that we need to deliver right now is that, you know, we're continuing our operations because they are so critical to the world continuing to function. And that's part of what our role is, our contribution is right now. And that's sort of, we leave it at that, right? And we have to sort of stay back a little bit and make sure we don't come across as opportunistic.
And I think another thing to think about is you don't always have to be the one tooting your own horn. You can let others tell your story for you. And that rings true whether you're in the middle of a global pandemic or not. We've partnered with Dig Deep. They're an organization that provides long-term sustainable access to water. And there's about 2 million people in the US that still don't have access to running water. So if you can imagine trying to fight coronavirus without running water, the Navajo Nation in the Southwest US has the 3rd highest infection rate behind New York and New Jersey. So Dig Deep made us aware of the dire situation that was taking place on the reservation. And to date, we've given them 250,000 gallons of water, but it was Dig Deep that sent out the press release, not us. And it was Dig Deep that mentioned us in a New York Times op-ed, not us. And by the way, in both those instances, the story, the press release, the op-ed, they were really about the issue and the struggle. You know, we were kind of a passing reference in many respects, but still getting the brand name out there in a credible, authentic, and not boastful way.
Right. And that leads me sort of to the next question about tactics, right? So, you know, there's a lot of traditional communications tactics, you know, from earned media, earned speaking opportunities. But right now, obviously, it's probably, you know, very hard to cut through a lot of that noise. You know, how, you know, Tara, you mentioned changing, you know, shifting from traditional advertising to PSAs, but what are some of the tactics, you know, that you're seeing, you know, in lieu of, you know, a lot of the more traditional, you know, media outlets covering industry that are working for you at the time? And once, you know, things go back to the new normal, will you keep those tactics in place, or will you sort of revert back to historically what's worked?
I mean, I think it's having the courage a little bit to try some new things, and not everything is going to work. And if it's not working, you need to kind of be able to pivot quickly, and the things that work well, you're probably going to stick with. You know, you should try to find your way into a story by leaning in, listening, and lifting up communities. You know, Poland Spring is celebrating its 175th anniversary this year. It's one of our top brands. Well, needless to say, this is not what we planned in terms of consumer communication or in the home state of Maine. We had this massive 175th anniversary Heritage Day celebration planned with a tie-in with iHeartRadio and the Elvis Duran in the Morning Show. None of that is happening, right? We had to pivot, and we had to do it quickly. So instead of a big celebration, we're, you know, leaning in and created a fund in Maine to support the Maine Tourism Association, along with, you know, the Tourism Association. The hospitality industry in Maine is really challenged right now. And so it's understanding what the need is in the moment. You know, we were supposed to be sponsoring a $1,000 daily giveaway on the Elvis Duran show every morning, talking about the 175th anniversary. Well, nothing could be, I think, more tone deaf than that right now. And so what we did is we shifted, instead of 1,000, we gave 2,000. And the idea is, you know, whoever wins that money, they're going to give that extra 1,000 to a frontline worker or somebody who really needs it as part of kind of doing 175 good things. And so it's being able to have that speed, that agility, pivot quickly, try new things, if it's not working, stop doing it and try something else. Not everything is going to work, but having the ability to recognize quickly if something isn't resonating is important.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I would totally agree with that notion of sort of trying with agility and moving quickly. I think this is absolutely a time when, our plans for the quarter just basically, they just go out the window. You can't plan that way anymore. And you simply have to say kind of, what's our plan for today? We might have a little bit of a plan for the week, and, we have to be working really dynamically. A couple of things that we've seen are pretty important for us is the fact that, the digital first mindset that we've been really driving our corporate marketing, corporate communications toward has become more important than ever. And so especially as we look ahead towards a kind of post-COVID world, and hopefully that we'll get there really soon, we still see, for example, that we will be unlikely to be able to see our customers or our partners at trade shows or physical events for the foreseeable future. Josh, we were talking about Mobile World Congress. We were one of the first ones to pull out and cancel our participation because we didn't want to expose our employees to that, and that's probably going to continue for quite some time, even as things start to come back up. And so moving those and trial and error, I love that that notion too, Tara, that you said about sort of what does the new virtual event experience look like? What are the new interactions that we actually have to create with our customers to be able to still reach them in a way that is meaningful, but knowing that we can't do the traditional thing that we might do at a trade show, which is to set up lots of meetings and be able to see them face to face. I would say the other thing that has been really important for us has been really not being shy about talking about our values during this situation. And, in Micron's case, our company headquarters is in Boise, Idaho, and we are one of the larger employers in the state, and we have a long history of being part of the community. One of the things we haven't been shy about is really making our position known when we believe that we have to share that with the community because it aligns with our values. And so one of the things that we saw early on in the crisis was there was quite a bit of negative commentary about the origins of this virus and kind of blaming, and in fact, by some people in the U.S. administration, we were not shy about putting our own voice out there about what we think is really important. And our CEO penned an op-ed for the Idaho Statesman, which is the most important newspaper in our local state community. And we really put our perspective out there. This is a human virus. This is a human condition, and it requires the best of humankind. It really requires our collaboration and our partnership across the world. And we weren't shy about putting that out there. And I think that's important too, because it goes back to, again, Tara, what you were saying about purpose. And it's about bringing your values to the forefront and living them in a way where you're not shy about putting your brand leadership out there that way.
I love the point you just made about being human, right? Such a novel concept.
And yet sometimes we need a reminder about that, or maybe on a daily basis these days.
Yeah, and I think Martina, we talked about, now we're all used to being introduced to each other's pets, our kids, right? There's something more human about now, even how we do Zoom meetings and webinars, that it feels more human. You see our homes, and it's a very different time.
It's so true what you say. First of all, this is the first time I've put on a blazer in I don't know how many months. So it's a bit of a novelty to go back into that part of my closet. But, it's so true. One of the things, I'm responsible as well is for employee communications. And I talked a little bit about that. But, we've really seen that we are hosting, for example, thanks to these video conferencing technologies, we're hosting virtual town halls for our CEO and his staff weekly with our team members. And the level of trust and alignment that our team members have in our leadership team through this situation is extraordinary. We've been checking in with our team members. We actually had a survey that we did twice now to say, how do they feel about feeling safe on site? How do they feel about the future of the company? And I think over 91% of them have said that they feel confident in Micron's future. 95% of them in our last survey said that they're satisfied with the frequency of communication that they're getting and the regularity of, the visibility of the executive team. And I don't know about anybody else on the phone here, but I don't think I've ever seen 95% of employees agree on anything in a survey. So these are the kinds of things where I think we've really seen that the vulnerability of leadership to show up in a very authentic way, in a very transparent way, in a way that is very accessible, where they're just taking questions in the same way that we are here, really translates into a huge benefit for how employees are engaged. And I think that's something we can't lose sight of, because, you know, all of our people are going through incredibly difficult times, whether they are frontline employees, like Tara and I were just talking about some of our employees here in our companies, or simply it's, you know, the workforce that is working remotely, but maybe with less than ideal circumstances, family stress, no child care, worries about, you know, friends and family who might be impacted by this, financial concerns. There's a lot of stress out there, and that's part of our responsibility as well as communicators, is to make sure that everyone knows that our companies are there for them, and these are the things that we're doing to help support them.
Yeah, I think visibility for executive teams is essential, but every leader can really take this on and try to do things a little bit differently. You don't need to sit in the C-suite in order to lead through this. You know, it could be as simple as just doing a daily check-in with your team every morning, just to see how people are. What are they focused on that day? You know, we're doing that with my team, but one of the other things we're doing is we're doing kind of weekly trivia and just asking a simple question that everybody answers to get to know each other in a more human way. And it's really helping to keep us connected.
Right. And before we run out of time, Andy, you know, one of the things, you know, I think Martina sits in the Bay Area, Tara's in Connecticut, you know, I'm in New Jersey, typically you're in New York. When you look more globally than just, you know, the US or, you know, the Northeast and California, how are companies thinking about strategies differently internationally and by market? Because it seems like each market is slightly different right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's obviously it makes the task much harder for communications leaders who are having to design messaging that makes sense across an enterprise that's located in potentially dozens of countries, but where the market conditions are very different. I think the tough thing about this situation, which I've been incredibly impressed listening to Tara and Martina talking about the things that they're doing, is this trade-off between wanting to say a lot as a leader to reassure people and to point to what the future is going to look like in a context where most of us really don't have any idea about what the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months are going to look like. And there are definitely risks to putting out hostages to fortune, making predictions about what the future is going to be like. And I think we've seen from leaders in a whole host of different corners of business, government, and elsewhere, messaging that has ultimately left people confused because the story has changed as the unpredictable part of the virus has changed, and people are seeing how things are playing out differently in Europe than they are in the Americas versus how things are going in Asia. So I think it's an understandable, I think, desire to want to be able to talk to give people some reassurance by looking out to where the world is going. I think it's a tough trade-off for executive teams to want to rein themselves in from making claims that ultimately may not prove to be correct. I think there's one thing I'm taking a lot of reassurance from is listening to the leaders of some of our clients and from other businesses talking about their past experience in managing crisis. We have a client who played a very central role in managing the financial crisis, and he's talking a lot about what that experience was like in 2008. And I think it's somewhat reassuring and can provide guidance and inspiration and some direction in listening to him talk about what it was like to be in that situation that was at the time felt unprecedented and hard to manage, and trying to draw some lessons for how we might respond to the awful situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Well, and Andy, if I could just offer one thing that I think is really interesting about what you said, is that notion of balancing sort of a global statement with the reality that things are very different on the ground. And one of the things that we've really tried to do is, I think it's a little bit like the old chestnut of, all politics is local. I think all communications probably are local too, if you really get down to it. And so, yes, we do need to have a kind of guiding sort of North Star in what we're communicating by the CEO and executive team, and kind of externally and globally. But we have also leaned really heavily on our site leaders at each of our sites. And that is, as I said, we have operations in Italy, Germany, and the UK, across EMEA, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, China, India, and of course, across the US, we have 11 sites. And so through all the operations that we have, our site leaders have been a really important resource to the team members in each of those locations. And that's also meant that for us as communicators, we have to think about how do we then personalize that message? How do we support those teams that are local, the HR teams that are local, and making sure that we're giving them that information so that we can actually get really actionable information to our team members in a way that then is relevant to them and feels like it makes sense for their local context. And it's going to be very different, in terms of in every state and every location, every office that we have.